Good afternoon. A little bit on the afternoon side, 1 o'clock, but I'm here anyway. As of as of yesterday, there are 18 new cases. In a 7-day average, there's 55. Going over to the cases now, we have 6.57 million plus 5,082. This was last update in the last 20 hours. 85,143 deaths plus 143. New Oasis County, 18 new deaths in New Oasis County plus 1449. 1 million tests have been taken, over 1 million. Positive tests, 57.412. 5.3 have been positive. People hospitalized in the 7-day average since February 28th. Since 2 days ago, 43,352 people hospitalized and over 8,800 people are in ICU. Vaccinations. 71.1% have had at least one dose, which is 20.6 million. And 17 million have been fully vaccinated. So we're reaching to that end of the tunnel. This was yesterday. So here's a graph. New deaths per day. The 7-day average. But in the New Oasis County, 151 newly reported cases on February 28th. But there is probably some good news. There's probably some good news through COVID. It's like everyone's getting vaccinated again. Everyone's questioning like, what type of vaccine should I get? What types of people? What types should people suggest? I suggest you get the Pfizer vaccine. And as it approaches many questionable children, probably many children are questioning this. According to CNBC, Pfizer COVID vaccine was just 12% effective against Omicron in case 5 to 11. That study. The key points here is that New York State officials found the effectiveness of Pfizer's vaccine against COVID infection plummeted from 68% to 12% in children ages 5 to 11 during the Omicron stage surge. Dramatic drop in the vaccine effectiveness was likely due to the lower dosage of youngsters received, according to their study team members. Data came as New York City plans to end its school mask mandate by March 7th, so we could see enlightening at home from New York. The New York State Department of Health found that the effectiveness of Pfizer's vaccine against plummeted from 68 to 12%, and for kids in that age from December 13th to January 24th, it dropped from 100% to 48% during that same period. But research also compared 11 and 12-year-olds during the weekend ending January 30th. They found the vaccine effectiveness plunged to 11% for the low dosage group but offered 6-7% protection for the group that received the higher dose. For children aged 12 to 17 years old, vaccine effectiveness against children dropped from 66% to 51% from December to the end of January. Protection against hospitalization dropped 85% to 17% through teenagers during that same period. Data comes New York City plans to end school mask mandate by March 7th. California is doing the same 4 days later. State governments are easing mandates and restrictions as COVID infections declined dramatically after Omicron swept the nation in December and January. But from the pandemic high in January, the U.S. reported ravaged nearly 66 new infections on Sunday, compared to the more than over 800,000 according to CNBC. So That's the latest. I mean, COVID's diving down because of the children, because of the vaccine. The vaccines are going up, the vaccines are going down. Maybe it's probably because of the children, because of those low dosages. So I guess it's all how you look at it from everyone's point of perspective. Again, masks. Masks are very important. At the bridge of the nose. If your work is requiring you to wear a mask, then okay. If your work's not, then what you basically need to do is to make sure that you follow that mask mandate. Also, you need to make sure that if you're already vaccinated, you're in the oxygenary zone. You also need to make sure that you're getting vaccinated. Make sure you stay quarantined. Don't go outside during quarantine unless you gotta go pick up the mail or go take up the trash. If you have a medical condition, let them know beforehand. Social distance, big one. Wash your hands, sanitize your hands. It's very, very important that we get ourselves back into the game, because as it approaches, all we're doing is bouncing off the wall. That's all we're doing. All right, okay. Yesterday I talked to you guys about stupid in America. And I want to be very clear. I did not call any of your kids stupid. I'm saying the system is stupid. But there's one thing I did not talk about. How teachers make more money. It's the blob thing. Next, we're going to turn to the janitors. In a 60 Minutes report from November 15, 1992, we'll tell you how much the janitors make and tell you what janitors do. We'll be right back. Imagine a job that pays nearly double the national average. A job where no one checks to see if or even when you show up to work. If it sounds like you can clean up on a job, then you'd be right. Apply to New York City School Board of Education or any other place of education. Tell them you have to be a school custodian. Here's Steve Kaufman's report from February 15, 1992.
Cleaning up as a New York City school custodian doesn't mean pushing a broom. Custodians are more like building superintendents than janitors. They're responsible for keeping the school well-maintained and clean. They hire their own staff, and thanks to the work rules, even they don't have to sweep very often. New York City school custodians...
This isn't mine. This was from another channel.
...privileges that stuns almost anyone that's visited the rundown, dirty schools that make up much of the system. This is Erasmus Hall in Brooklyn, a building where 3,000 students try to get a high school education. The Board of Education didn't want 60 Minutes taping in its school corridors, but the president of the Erasmus Hall Parents Association offered to take us and our concealed camera on a tour. Up the dirty stairwells and down hallways covered with graffiti.
This is like 32 miles to the New York subway.
There was peeling paint everywhere and broken drinking fountains.
We've only got 2 water fountains operating in the school.
Then we went into the bathrooms.
There's absolutely no privacy and no facilities for cleaning yourself up appropriately.
And when the sights didn't shock you, the odors did.
What is the smell?
We have apparently some sewage leaking underground. The odor is unbelievable. It's like living in a cesspool.
And everywhere, broken windows.
How long have these windows been broken?
The windows have been broken for weeks.
No one is claiming it's easy to maintain old and long-neglected schools, but almost everyone we talked to thought school custodians weren't doing the job as well as they should.
Tell me about Mr. White, the custodian. Is he ever here?
Mr. White, as I know it, and I'm here approximately every day, is here maybe a few hours a day. I've even had cleaners complain that he's seldom on the premises.
On the day we waited to see Mr. White, it was after 2 p.m. when he pulled up to the school gate. He was gone by 4:15. None of this is a surprise to John Fager, chairman of the Citywide Parents Coalition. He began to get interested in the custodial system 8 years ago, when the principal of his children's school called to tell him that the cafeteria was so filthy, it had been cited for a health code violation.
Can you imagine 1,000 kids eating in a small cafeteria? By the end of the week, if you only scrub it once a week,
They only have to scrub it once a week?
they only scrub the cafeteria floor once a week.
How often do they have to clean the classrooms?
mop the floors? They mop, 3 times a year.
You're kidding.
No, they mop and wax 3 times a year. It's a basic sweeping, that's what goes on every other day.
What do they do the rest of the time?
No one really knows.
New York School's Chancellor Joe Fernandez is the latest in a long list of reformers who have tried to sweep away a bizarre set of contract regulations and work rules that allows the city school custodians to clean up all the way to the bank. Fernandez says it's a problem he began to deal with on his very first day on the job 2.5 years ago.
I walked into my office and I saw these telephone wires that were laying around the floor all over the rug. And I asked for the custodian to come up to clean the thing, and I was told that they don't vacuum it until next week. This is all scheduled. Of course, I hit the ceiling.
Do the custodians paint?
Yeah. However, they only can paint up to 8 feet. Some of these things I'm going to tell you are going to sound ludicrous, but it's a
Why
reality. It's a jurisdictional issue with the painters union.
I want to make sure that I've got my figures right, because we've been told that the average base salary for a custodian in New York City is $58,000 a year,
Yeah, that's the average, right?
which is $20,000 more than a teacher makes.
Yeah. That's right. That's absolutely correct. That's one of the problems I have.
That salary gap is not a problem for James Kelly, the custodian at Intermediate School 70 and the president of Local 891 of the International Union of Operating Engineers, the 1,000-member custodians local.
To compare us to teachers is a very unfair comparison. It's not our fault to begin with that the Board of Education does not pay its teachers enough. But I think it's unfair to compare us to teachers. First of all, we work all year round. Teachers work half the hours we do. So just in time alone, the hours we spend in the school building versus what a teacher or anybody else in the building other than us spends, there's a big difference there.
That's the justification for the $20,000 salary.
I would say so.
You think your men are underpaid?
Absolutely, of course.
Kelly blames the shape the schools are in on the Board of Education. He says it sets the cleaning schedule, not the union, and that custodians' work orders for major maintenance languish in the board's backed-up bureaucracy. But teachers, principals, and parents we talk to think that the custodians could be doing a lot of the work themselves.
The joke among the principals is when they die and they want to come back to earth as custodians.
Reincarnate as a custodian, that's not a bad idea. I often tell the story when I first got here to New York and I went to visit a school in the South Bronx. It was a very nice school, very well done, but I walked into the front door and I saw this person in a suit, shirt, and tie, and I thought it was the principal. I went over and introduced myself. It was the head custodian with his own office and everything.
His own office often means his own secretary, and his own secretary often means his own wife, and an additional $25,000 to $30,000 in family income. While nepotism was banned in a rare contract reform, relatives and wives already on the payroll were grandfathered into their jobs. And today, according to school administrators, custodians simply get around the rule by hiring each other's wives.
So why would they do that? We'll tell you in a moment. So if you just joined us, we're talking about school custodians, how they get around the rules, and how they make a lot more money than teachers. $50,000. That's more than that's $20,000 more than what a teacher makes. But before we continue on, 2 hours ago, there's an article in the New York Post. It says Ethan Crumley mold using Molotov cocktails in Michigan school shooting. I got selling myself 3 meals a day, TV to watch. Ethan wrote to jail. Ethan wrote on January 16th. But attorneys for Ethan, meanwhile, had argued that county jail was not the proper facility, and the parent people being held to the $5,000 bond. So, Molotov cocktail probably not true. So. Once again, here's Steve Croft with the sweeping away the janitor thing.
There are custodians who have other custodians' wives work with them. That's correct.
Good practice.
Well, it's not so easy to find capable people all the time to do a particular job. So
They hire their wives.
they can
that what you're saying?
They can hire
They
them.
can't, so they hire someone else's wife. They hire one of their friends' wives.
Almost all married women are somebody else's wife, right?
It sounds like a pretty good job.
Yeah, I guess if you want to make a lot of money and you want to get some of your family working and you want to have a Jeep and a lot of other perks, it's a great job. Yeah,
Jeep?
Jeep, yeah. The Board of Ed spends $1 million a year subsidizing the custodians' purchasing of Jeeps.
Why do they need a Jeep?
Well, Steve, you're not aware of this, I know, but according to the contract, New York City is in a snow belt. And we have 5 out of 12 months are snow season. So the board spends 5 twelfths, buys 5 twelfths of the Jeep, and the custodian buys 7 twelfths. But after 5 years, guess who ends up owning the Jeep outright?
The custodian.
The custodian.
How much money would it cost you to get the schoolyard plowed at Smithers? If you were gonna go out and hire somebody to do it?
It'll cost you nothing, because in New York City, you wait till 3 o'clock that afternoon and it all melts.
Earlier this year, Chancellor Fernandez put a hold on buying new utility vehicles, no matter what brand everybody calls them Jeeps, by insisting that custodians get his personal approval before every purchase. It's a rule the custodians union expects to overturn in arbitration.
I may lose that, but at least we're fighting the good fight on this. You speak to anybody out there, and they will tell you that the custodial contract has to be changed, that there are things in the custodial contract that can't stay in there any longer.
Fernandez isn't the first person to say that. The Women's City Club of New York said the same thing in this report, and that was back in 1942. Over the years, the Board of Education has been unwilling to take on the politically powerful union, and local principals have been afraid to take on individual custodians who run their schools as private fiefdoms.
You can go out and talk to principals, and if they're courageous enough, some of the principals will tell you is that they're afraid of giving the custodians a bad evaluation because they'll take it out on them in other ways of maintaining the building.
We took the Chancellor's advice and tried to talk with some principals. We called more than 3 dozen. Plenty had tales to tell off the record, but not in front of our cameras. One principal who was willing to talk was later instructed to cancel her interview by her district superintendent. A matter of personal safety, he told her. 2 others said that they'd had their tires slashed after talking to reporters. Finally, we found one principal willing to speak out. Gloria Rakovic at Brooklyn's High School of Telecommunications told us the biggest problem is that custodians don't work for the principal. She has no control over her school's maintenance schedule, budget, or custodial staff. The custodians answer only to a central maintenance office. Mrs. Rakovic says her present custodian does a good job, and in the past, she's been saddled with what she calls
the vanishing custodian. Recently, I had one who was absent for 75 days out of the school year.
Which is what, 180 days?
180 days, so you're figuring you're almost at a 50% absentee rate. There are emergencies that happen in the building. The custodian is my technical consultant. I need that person. I depend on that person.
And you had one custodian that was here barely half the time?
That's right. Exactly.
Is the case of the vanishing custodian fairly common in New York City?
One of the issues at hand from colleagues that I hear about simply is, I don't know where my custodian is.
They may not know, but Ed Stanzik does. Stanzik, a former rackets prosecutor, is the independent special commissioner for investigation for New York schools.
There are people who conduct completely different careers outside the school on Board of Ed time. We have a custodian who's a charter pilot for hire, flying people around the country on Board of Ed time.
Owns his own plane.
That's right. We have another custodian who's a practicing real estate attorney. We got complaints from the principal he could never reach the custodian because he was in court. That's not the same thing as someone calling in sick so they can go fishing.
The overwhelming majority of custodians are right on site at all times. There are any number of reasons you have to go out, leave the building or leave the site to do a particular thing. But our men are on the jobs.
Mr. Kelly is apparently unfamiliar with William Ryan, New York school custodian. Mr. Ryan is custodian of a school administrative building in Brooklyn. On the day we followed him, one of the many days where Ed Stanzik's investigators followed him, he arrived at his building at 8:45. He left on errands twice in the morning, and by 11:45 he was gone for the day. After a leisurely lunch at a seaside restaurant, he was off to Long Beach, Long Island, and an afternoon aboard his 34-foot cabin cruiser. All of it on school time.
In the time that we've been watching him, at least half of that time, he's been outside the school working on his cabin cruiser while he should have been in school and was getting paid to be in school.
How many William Ryans are there out there?
I can't give you a number. I can tell you that there's 100 or 200 William Ryans out there. I can tell you that as we've looked at the problem both historically up to the present day, the cases that we're doing, it's persistent enough problem that you can't just say it's a couple of bad apples.
But Stanzik says vanishing custodians are only part of what his investigation has turned up. Remember those Jeeps? Well, like everything else the custodians pay for, from floor wax to computers,
The money for his salary, his workers' salaries, and his expenses comes payable to him personally. It typically goes into his personal checkbook with the
He
money.
gets a check from the city and he just puts it in his bank account?
That's right, and it gets mixed up with the money he uses to buy his groceries and make his car payments and everything else.
Is there any oversight at all?
There is oversight, but a system like that has many opportunities for someone with larceny in his heart to get around the controls.
In the last couple of years, you've had to cut $750 million out of your budget. You've had to do away with programs. You've had teachers' jobs on the line. Why can't you change this?
It's a matter of what's in the contract and what has to be implemented. We are looking, as I said, at the entire custodial contract. I would love to be able to pay teachers what we pay custodians.
Do you understand how ridiculous that sounds?
Of course it's ridiculous. Of course it's ridiculous.
And New York City's not alone. In many big cities across the country, more than half the school salary checks every month go to people other than teachers. In New York this week, there was a move to change that. As the result of the special commissioner's investigation, 3 school custodians, including our yachtsman, were arrested. 5 others will probably be fired. And those who aren't will, if all goes according to plan, from now on report to the principal. How does the president of the union feel about this? Well, he's no longer president of the union. He didn't get reelected.
So what's the advice to all custodians that want to vanish? I'll tell you in a moment. Throughout this half hour, we've been focusing on the vanishing custodian. As we saw in this 60 Minutes report, all about the vanishing custodians, meaning those people who work part-time and have to go to other jobs. Like one custodian was a charter pilot, one custodian was a real estate attorney. The advice I have, don't just stick with your custodian job. Just stick with it. It's a full-time job. I mean, if you're going to be a custodian to help out with your family and stuff, you need to make sure that you know what you're doing. You need to make sure you don't vanish. You don't go out. It's like this. It's not the same thing as like the investigator said. That's not the same thing as calling in sick so you can go fishing. I mean, complaints have been filed because you can never be reached because of this, because of that. So what needs to happen here is deal with your job, deal with your custodians. Don't vanish and then go out to your part-time job. I mean, as a janitor, you got to make sure your school's clean, the floor's swept, the floor's mopped, the floor's waxed, the cafeteria's clean, the classroom's clean, etc. Make sure of that. So what people need to do is just get together, start to play and say, I'm sorry, I have a job as a custodian, but you have to choose between this job and between custodians and this job. I mean, you can't be coming together. But in the case of this one, from now on, the report to the principal will probably be arrested. So that is some very great news. Very great news. Friday, it's all about the food fights. Didn't talk about it last week, but there's some things I didn't mention. So we're going to have that for you on Friday. That's all for this edition of Give Me a Break Wednesday. We'll see you again for Give Me a Break Friday. Have a nice day, everyone. I'll see you. Have a nice day, everyone. We'll always here at YouTube. Good day.